Welcome to Refactored M365 Unlocked, where I help you get the most out of your Microsoft 365 applications. In this video, we're going to talk about a feature in PowerPoint that you may already know exists, but you likely haven't ever used, and that is the Morph transition. You may be familiar with transitions in general, things like fade or push or split. You might have used those in a presentation, or maybe even used a combination of the types of transitions plus an animation where you bringing in text and making images pop up based on an animation. Morph is a more advanced transition where it's going to take your text and graphics and treat them as if it's more like a storyboard. So you're going to be able to move your graphics from one slide to the next. And that may sound a little confusing if you've never seen this before, but I've got plenty of examples to show you. But before I start with that, I want to talk about some rules, and that may sound a little odd talking about a morph transition with rules, but one thing I want to point out is that you really want to use these transitions sparingly. The last thing you want to do is distract your viewers from the presentation, from the content, from you presenting the information. So use these sparingly, but when done correctly, they can be really effective. And from my own experience, they're best used when presenting in person. Otherwise, if you're doing this over a virtual meeting or something like that, it just distracts from the content. I would use it only in person, and of course, just like with any presentation, you want to tell a story with your visual enhancements on the screen, but that does not need to be the focus of the presentation. The focus is you and your content. And I've got 4 examples that I'm going to show you ranging from involvement. And I want to say difficulty because they're really not that difficult to pull off, but some are a little more involved depending on how much you enjoy, and yes, I did say enjoy, how much you enjoy doing these types of transitions, because you can have a lot of fun with this and move things around in a cool way, but it just depends on how involved and how much time you want to spend doing these transitions. So first, let's look at the simple resize. Now this is a very simple effect. I've got 3 boxes with dotted lines. Maybe I'm talking about 3 different types of products or announcements that I want to have to an audience. So I've got 3 products, and all I'm going to do is advance one slide, and I'll go out of the slide deck mode so that you can see how this is created. But I'm going to go from this slide now with one click. I have expanded this and made these larger. It's a very simple resize. You could do this with any type of graphic or text, so the same principle applies. You've got a small visual here on one slide, and then on the second slide I've got a much larger one. So let's get out of the presentation mode and go straight into the normal edit mode, and you can see I've got my slide with the 3 boxes, and then above this I've got my smaller boxes. But notice that I'm not using any type of animation. There's no difference between these. All I've done is a simple copy and paste into another slide here, and then you can see these larger boxes. But up here in the menu, if you want to create this effect, you just go to transitions and you pick the slide that you actually want to have the transition, and you pick morph. So for example, I could do a fade, and you can see a preview of what that would look like, and it would just be a simple fade between the 2, and it's just very straightforward and simple. But if I go and change the transition to morph, all I'm doing is a simple click into morph, and I always adjust the time here because sometimes the transition takes a little longer. But that's all I did. I just made one click and morph, and I had now 3 boxes. So why would you want to use that? Well, there may be times where you want to draw attention to certain types of content, or you want to zoom in on something. And this is a common theme that I'm going to have throughout this video of you need to look at content more as a telling of a story. So zooming in on something, double clicking on a page, now they're double clicking on your presentation. So that's the simple resize. Now I'm going to go back into presentation mode, and I'm going to go to the next one, and that is an object-specific resize. So I've got this speed meter here where I'm going to talk about something that I want to optimize. Maybe I'm presenting to a leadership team where I want to convince the leadership team that I've got some great suggestions on how we can optimize or make things more efficient. So I've got a simple graphic, and I want you to see what I'm doing here. Very simple. All I did was rotate the graphic and make it a resize. So exact same method as before. The only thing I'm doing here is now calling attention. This is why you might want to use this. You've got a speed meter that is visually enhanced, and now I've got my content that calls attention to it. So here we go. I'm going to start talking about my speed of the optimization and the efficiencies that I want to drive, and now I'm going to really drill into that content. So escaping back out so that you can see how that is done, I've got my slide here, no animations, and I have chosen on this slide Morph. So if you zoom out, you can see that I've just taken the image, made it larger, and rotated it. And you can do whatever you want to here. I could rotate it to make it a different way if I wanted to make it in the red, if I wanted to show the opposite effect. And so if I go to do my morph transition, the same exact effect, and I can add my text where I want to talk about improving efficiency, enhancing communication, and ensuring quality control. So this is a way, hopefully, that you can see to provide some pop to your presentations. Now, hopefully you can also understand that this is something we need to use sparingly, like I mentioned at the beginning. You don't want every single slide to have tons and tons of transitions, otherwise it can really distract from the content and the message that you're trying to convey. So again, use sparingly. But when you do it right, it can really add some nice effect. So let's now look at another option, which is what I'm calling an interactive resize. So far, all we've done is make images bigger, but this time, this is going to use a couple of advanced techniques, and it's going to load out here. I'm going to click one time, and you're going to see the full build out. So I've got an image, and now I'm building a little bit of a timeline. I'm blowing this up. I'm adding some animations. And so you can see here that the effect is it's a little bit of a draw out, and you don't necessarily have to put this much effort into every single one, but this is quite involved. So if I zoom back in, I've got a couple of different transitions. This is the original image, and I just pulled this from the internet. I've got a little stat graphic here, and what I've done is add this little option. I used circles and lines to add that in, but all I've done is look at the actual graphic and pull this out. So let's go back out of presentation mode so I can show you what I've done within this. So I'm going to go down to our slide, and I've got this graphic that I've pulled from the web, and I put this in here. Maybe this is something I really want to draw attention to around some data. And I looked at this graphic and I thought, all right, I want to zoom in on this. Again, trying to tell a story. So I'm going to take this part of the graphic and I want to zoom in on it. And so what I did is I went in and built a bunch of circles and lines to line this up to the graphic. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, this may sound like a lot of work, and it is. I mean, there's some extra effort that goes into this, but it can be a really nice effect if you're doing this for a big presentation and you want to make an impression, maybe on one particular slide. Again, don't do it on every slide. But I added this in, I put in some extra animations. There's some extra animations involved, but the morph effect is used to go from this point to this point, which is using our resize. So I took this graphic that I made and within PowerPoint, and I enhanced it. I made it larger and I added some extra text and graphics. And so the effect that you get, we'll go back into presentation mode here. The effect that you get after building this out is a nice animation that enhances the visual, adds some extra text, and now I can speak to each one of these points. Now you may be thinking to yourself, I don't know if this would be useful. Maybe it's a one shot where I use this on one particular graphic, and that's okay. So let's look at one final example, and I'm going to call this an interactive plus data resize. So I've got 4 icons here, and I've got some stats around each of these icons. And maybe it's around taking pictures, it's going into an office, it's how many times we're scanning our employee IDs in the office, and then the amount of ideas over time. This is just random data that I've come up with, but I've got 4 different graphics that I want to convey a message to. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit next, and you're going to see what I've got an additional enhancement build out. So I've taken the original graphics, and I'm going to use a resize of the images to make them smaller and pushed over to the left. and then I've added this graphic along with it. So let's take this step by step because it's a little more complicated. So I'm going to go back out to our PowerPoint, and I've only got 2 slides to make all of this happen. So these are my 4 graphics, nothing special about them. But then what I've done is I've gone to this particular slide, and I'm going to build this one out in real time so that you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to go to duplicate slide just so I can keep all of my graphics together. And let's just say that I want to take these and resize them all down and move them over to the left. So this is this resize that I'm referring to. And I'm going to have this morph. And so all I've done is taken a duplicate of this slide, added it here, resized them, and clicked on morph. And then you can see the effect. Right, so it resizes them and moves them around, and I can change the duration of that to make it happen a little faster. So the same thing happened here, except the difference is that I've added a chart, which is just like you would add in any other context. So you can add this chart in, you can edit this within Excel, you can add your own data within PowerPoint, but I've added a chart, put in some data, and then I put the images here. And then I've charted this out, but I've added an animation where these will go and follow a path, which I can cover this in another video, but for the purposes of this particular tutorial, all I've done is added some extra flair, and I have put a path to follow the chart so that when I hit preview, you can see that all these things are doing is just following the chart, but the chart itself is building out. So now this is probably the most advanced technique from a morph transition in the realm of PowerPoint anyway, of things that you can do to make a visual splash with your presentations. Use this sparingly, as I've said multiple times, but this one in particular is going to involve the most amount of steps because you're having to put all of these techniques together to resize your graphics, put in a chart, add some animations, and pull this all together for a nice effect where you can make a visual splash. So hopefully this video has been helpful, if nothing else, to give you some ideas and inspire your presentations where you can take your graphics to the next level and you can present the data to your audience in a more impactful way.